Go ahead.
All right. We've heard about taxes so far, and Mr. Sutton, you were talking about that 35% tax bracket. And as I understand it, the argument over the last round of tax cuts is whether to go back up to 39%. My numbers aren't exactly accurate because I just came up with this question, but under Reagan, that number was in the 50s, and then back in 1970 and in the 60s, that number was in the 70s. And yet, over that time, while America's gotten economically prosperous, every 10 years or so, we've seen a recession, and they seem to be getting worse. And this is with all sorts of combinations of control over the House and control over the Senate and control over the White House. So what I'm asking, I guess, is what needs to be done? What's the proper percentage for this tax, and what needs to be done to break this cycle of every 10 years we go into another recession?
Okay, Mr. Space, I think you're first on that one.
Thank you. I think, first of all, with respect to the tax extensions, we're in the middle of a recession, and it's the wrong time to raise taxes, I think, on just about anybody. My feeling is we should postpone, we should continue the current rates until next year, reassess, see where we are. But the larger question is how we allocate our tax responsibility. Now, Mr. Gibbs has denounced the stimulus, and I hope I'll have a chance to talk about the stimulus in more length in a later question. But about a third of the money allocated in the stimulus went in the form of tax cuts for the middle class. And he sneers, but he can't deny it. I mean, he can tell you it's some crazy tax. And the truth is, 99% of Americans benefited from a tax cut from the stimulus. That represents our country investing in the middle class. Maybe Mr. Gibbs doesn't like it because it wasn't targeted to just the very wealthiest Americans, because that tends to be the philosophy he and John Boehner follow across the board. I'll tell you what the answer is not. The right answer is not to go back to the economic policies that caused this recession. The 8 years of the Bush administration and a policy that believed firmly that all you have to do is benefit the wealthiest Americans, those very few number that make all the money and everything will be fine. It doesn't work. We're showing signs of progress. 23% reduction in unemployment in the last 8 months in this district. Every leading economic indicator would suggest we're returning to a state of prosperity. And the question now is, do we go back to the conditions that put us here, or do we keep plowing ahead with policies that are proven to work?
Thank you. Mr. Gibbs?
Well, the reason is every 10 years you have a recession. That's true. It's usually at the top of the decade. And some of that's business cycles, and that's a little bit of that. But the big problem is tax cuts do work. They do stimulate the economy, and the private sector and free market system will take off. But the problem is in Washington, D.C., it goes back to the deficit spending. Washington spends more than they take in constantly. And if you chart this out, the revenue's been like this and spending's like this. And that's the problem. It goes back to spending. And you can attack me all you want on revenues and taxes, but if Congressman Space has voted for massive tax increases, he's voted to raise the cost of energy with his cap and trade policy. It's going to that's equivalent to about 15% income tax hike. We just need to. And Reagan, he cut taxes, and he put us in the largest economic prosperity in the history of this country. And these policies that are going in Washington now are, at best, we'll have a stagnant economy. But this economy would take off if we would return the money. And when he talks about a third of the stimulus being tax cuts, that's really playing kind of funny games. I'll give you an example. $1,500 tax credit if you go buy new windows. If you don't need new windows, you don't get the tax credit. I'd rather give everybody the $1,500 tax credit. And maybe they give out a $400 check to everybody. Well, what we're looking at for middle class people, if the tax cuts, if taxes go up in January, that's about $250 a month increase.
Okay, Mr. Sutton.
Tax cuts do work. They stimulated our economy back in the early 20s. They stimulated our economy in the 80s. And I don't know who all, some might think already knows that they work or don't work, but they do. Everybody knows they lower taxes, jobs come back. However, the biggest problem for me with taxes in this country is, everybody ready for this? U.S. Constitution U.S. Constitution, all the way up until 1913, there was no income tax. And then, with the income tax, they said, well, we're gonna have this income tax. They established the 16th Amendment, and it'll never go over 7%. But it did, and it's been as high as up into the 70s. As a matter of fact, during this crisis a couple of years ago, for those who were getting benefits from getting large benefits, those who work for the bank, it was as high as 90%. And the federal government says, no, you're not getting that. So if you get the federal government out of people's pockets and get back to a tax base that this country was originated on, which is based on tariffs,